So today we're going to be talking about the famous Alcatraz prison escape. On June 12, 1962, three men, Frank Morris, John and Clarence Anglin, the Anglin brothers, escaped from the unescapable Alcatraz Island. One of the most enduring mysteries, and certainly one of the most mysterious that I've investigated, that I went back and forth on until I finally reached a conclusion as to what I think happened and what their fate was. The official verdict is that they made it off the island but drowned in the bay and their bodies swept out into the ocean. I will let you know my thoughts, what I think happened after my investigation into the Alcatraz prison escape. Stay tuned. Welcome to Unsolved No More. My name is Ken Maines. You might recognize me from the History Channel and my 5-episode series Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, or my 20 years investigating cold cases and unsolved mysteries. If you haven't checked out my book, please do, Unsolved No More, where it's an autobiography about how I came to investigate these unsolved mysteries and cold cases, which I love to do, and there is no bigger case and mystery that I investigated than this, the escape from Alcatraz. This prison escape is unbelievable. The more I dove into it, so far, of all the cases I've investigated, I don't know if I've had one that I flip-flopped so much back and forth as whether I believe the official verdict that they drowned or that they made it. But this morning, I finally made up my mind. So I wanted to share that with everybody. So what happened? On June 12th, 1962, famous Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, Frank Morris, John and Clarence Anglin did not respond to the roll count in the morning, and that was at 7:15 a.m. What they did was they escaped the night before, and they placed dummies in their cell in bed to make it look like they were sleeping. And the ingenuity that these three individuals had is mind-blowing. So the dummies that they created, they made from paper mache, and they used real human hair from the barbershop. And they placed these dummy heads in their bed so it looked like they were sleeping. So every time the guards would come by to do a head count at night, it looked like they were just sleeping. In reality, they were on their way to freedom. So let's get to the timeline a little bit here. They had worked on this plan for almost a year, and all three of these individuals had previous escapes, and that was one of the reasons they were sent to Alcatraz, because it was supposed to be escape proof. But Frank Morris, who was the oldest of the three, he was 35 years old when this prison escape took place. He was a bank robber. And John and Clarence Anglin were 32 and 31 respectively, and they too were bank robbers. And one of the things about bank robbers is, for the most part, you have to have some level of intelligence. From my experience, there are some that just wham bam go in, there's no planning, but that doesn't seem to be the case with these three individuals. They all seem to want to use their mind, and I guess just me, I wish they would have used their mind for a greater purpose than criminal activity, but they chose to use their mind for bank robbery and breaking and entering and burglaries, which Frank Morse had. So they planned this for over a year, and when they finally set the plan in motion, they went to bed, I believe, around 9:30 is when lights were out on June 11th, 1962. Lights go out. They had already dug out their grate in the back of the cell. And I'll show a picture of what it looks like. You know, it was a small grate, and they were able to, through a year or so, dig through this concrete, which was weakened by the air of the salt water from the bay. And they were able to dig out, and for weeks, even months, they had gone out of their cell at night, gone up to a platform that was above their cells while everybody else was sleeping, and work on a raft to get them across the bay, paddles, life preservers. They made all these items from stuff from inside the prison. They used 55 raincoats that the prisoners had and fashioned that into a raft and also life vests with air tubes inserted in it. Very, very smart. They sewed the seams. They vulcanized it, which means they would use the steam and the heat from the pipes inside the prison to create an airtight seal on those items. Extremely brilliant on their part. And so on June 12th, they left. They had their plan in motion, and they took off. Now, supposedly there was another guy who said that he was the mastermind of it, and he was supposed to go with that night as well, but he couldn't get out of the grate of his cell, and so Morris and the Anglin brothers left him. I think his name was Alan West. And a lot of what he said provided the FBI with great information of what Morris and the Anglin brothers' plan was. And that plan was they were going to head to Angel Island, which was about a mile from Alcatraz, through the water. From there, they were going to rob and steal a car and get money and make their escape. So did they make it? Well, let's look at the clues that was left behind. So as soon as the prison officials realized that there was an escape and they weren't there anymore, the first thing they do obviously is comb the island itself. So the clues that they left on the island indicated that they had made it to the shoreline and into the bay. So the next step is to look on the bay, take what were called debris boats and go up and down the bay and look for clues, potentially bodies if they did not make it. What they found on June 12th, their very first clue, was they found a homemade paddle. Now, that paddle was definitely linked to the escapees and to Alcatraz because they had left some items up on the platform where they were working. And I believe that they had left a life vest, which makes sense if Alan West did not leave, that his life vest would still be up there in pristine condition. They also had a smaller raft, which they had constructed. For some reason, they did not take that. And I'm unclear as to why that was not taken. It could possibly be that they couldn't fit 4 people into the raft that they had made, which was pretty large. I believe that raft was 6 foot by 14 foot. So a very large raft. So I think that was probably made for 4 people. So maybe the smaller one was to be a backup raft, or maybe they ran tests on it and it didn't work. I don't know why they left that. but they did, which was more clues for investigators. That's how they were able to determine the ingenuity of them, of what they made, and how meticulous they were. This stuff wasn't just thrown together. They took time to sew the seams, to vulcanize it, to put air inflators in it. So, I mean, very planned out. It wasn't in haste. So on 6/12, they find a paddle floating in the bay. So, you can deduce that they made it to the bay at least. On 6/14, they found a very important clue. So 2 days after the escape, in the bay, they find a weatherproof bag made of these rubber raincoats that encompassed addresses, I think 72 photographs, and other personal items belonging to either John or Clarence Anglin. Now, this is key because they found it important enough to take with them these addresses. You got to remember, you're not looking up addresses on Google or anything like that. Phone numbers and addresses you kept. And they took that with them because it was important. Same with the photographs. It had value to them. So that was a very important clue, that it was found in the bay and not, it was not taken with them. On 6/15, the very next day after that discovery, a life jacket is found. Now this life jacket is the exact same material. It's called I think a Mae West life preserver that was found inside the prison where they were working on that upper tier. Big discovery. So a life jacket washes up. So these are some of the clues that are turning up within a few days. What I find fascinating is 2 days after this, I believe it was the San Francisco newspaper, they hired 2 Olympic swimmers to make that swim just 2 days after this escape to see if it is possible. Now I find that very compelling because now if you do it 20 years later, things change. You try to replicate the currents and water temperature and stuff like that, but it's all a guessing game. Here they did that 2 days afterwards. So very, very close to this crime. And the expert swimmers made it in 53 minutes. And they had to be pulled out of the water close to shoreline because they were getting battered by the rocks. But they made it. Now they were expert swimmers. So that's important too. So here you have a bunch of clues, but what do they tell us? Do they tell us anything that moves this ball forward to end this mystery? And I think it does. So what do we see? We look at the facts. 50-degree water temperature. Cold. Hypothermia. You have to worry about that. They were not expert swimmers. Now, I read somewhere that their Anglin brothers family said, oh, they would swim in these creeks all the time. They were used to cold weather or cold water, and they were expert swimmers. I don't know if I buy that so much. But I will say that when they would have been in a panic, you would say, an excited delirium, because they just escaped from Alcatraz. But it's dark. It's cold. They enter these rafts. Did that raft stay afloat? The raft, supposedly, as the public was told, was never found. Now, I did a lot of researching, and in this case, here I have some of the FBI file. and I pored over this FBI file, and it gave a great insight to victimology and looking at, I guess they could be victimology or suspectology the more I think about it. They could have been victims of the Bay, and of course they were escapees, so suspectology. But I had a lot of background information about these three individuals. And one of the things that stood out the most to me was they didn't appear to be very good at being criminals. And that is important because they were arrested numerous times. I think I have 6 pages full of their rap sheet. Unlawful flight, bank robbery, attempted escape, burglary, criminal trespassing. I mean, numerous times that they are arrested, which to me means they're not very good at staying out of trouble. That's key as well. So Frank Morris was reportedly had a very high IQ and was very smart, and you can tell that by the craft of what he did with these life preservers, thinking about that and the way they were constructed. And the Anglin brothers were more hands-on labor type people and masters of escape as well. So I guess the bottom line here is the authorities want you to believe that they did not make it, and for many years, and I could concur with that. And the reason I can believe that is because of the water temperature being 50 degrees, as I said, the tide at that time pushing everything out from the bay into the ocean, and the fact that a life preserver was found, 2 of them washed up, and that bag full of letters. They would have kept that. They would have wanted to, it was important enough for them to take with them, and once they made it to the mainland, they certainly would want to use that in order to get to where they needed to go, if they were going to a relative's house or a friend's house, so on and so forth. Prevailing investigators at the time really honed in on that, as did I. They would not abandon those photographs. It's all they had in life. Okay, they were prisoners. They had nothing else. That meant the world to them. They stared at those pictures in their cells for years, and they packed it up and they took it with them. If it didn't mean anything to them, they'd have left it in the cell with the dummy heads and everything else that they left there. So they took it with it, and that was found, but no raft was found initially, is what everyone was told. However, there was a one-page document that I had read that stated there was a raft found on Angel Island, exactly where they said they were going, and there were footprints leading away from that raft. There was also a car stolen the next day. I believe it was a blue Chevy. Now, for many, many years, that was never brought up. No one knew about that. But I read the report, and I saw it. I saw where that was actually annotated. And that matches their exact plans of what they said they were going to do. So I had to weigh that as well. So on June 18th, so what's that, 6 days after the escape, the warden of Alcatraz gets a letter, gets a postcard, and I'll put it up here. And he said, "Ha ha, we made it. Frank, John, and Clarence." Crazy, right? But was it them, or was it a prank? The FBI took it serious enough because, according to the reports that I have read from the FBI file, is that they sent it for handwriting analysis and also fingerprints, and everything that came back was inconclusive. So I'll get more to what my thoughts are on that a little later. But again, on June 22nd, I had said that 2 life jackets had washed up. The first one washed up on June 15th. On June 22nd, another one surfaced. So what does that tell us as investigators? To a lot of people, it's been 50 years and no bodies were found. That was the only evidence that was found in that bay. A lot of people have speculated, most people, that they died, that they didn't make it, due to the life jackets being found, the paddle being found, and I would subscribe to that. Until, I'll tell you what may have changed my mind. I read the evidence reports from the FBI file. Okay? These FBI files and the lab reports are very telling. And what that told me was they tested 3 life jackets that were found. 1 that never made it off the island, and the 2 that washed up. The one that never made it off the island could be inflated, and then when they placed weights on top of that life jacket, it held its buoyancy. It didn't leak. That is key, because it tells you that they made these jackets that worked. These life jackets worked. The 2 that they tested that were in the bay for a few days in that water getting churned around, I believe one of them may have had a cut in it, but they were able to inflate those and they held their buoyancy as well. Not as good as the pristine one, which would make sense. But they also annotated in their notes, which is very important, that if you blew into the tube for inflation that they had put in there, it said without a doubt you could maintain buoyancy in that. So I never knew that, and that was key for me because it shows that these life preservers worked. Now, where are the bodies? If they didn't make it, where are the bodies? There was a report that a passing boat had said that they had seen a body floating, and that body was possibly wearing a dark coat. Investigators, especially from the prison warden was adamant that they did not make it, and he has his own reasons for saying that. But I gave some validity to this sighting. They said that the gentleman was face down and wearing like a navy blue coat. Well, that has validity because that is the type of prison coat that they wore in Alcatraz. So I thought, yes, that would have some validity. The people that spotted this alleged body notified the Coast Guard and authorities, and they sent a boat out right away, and they were unable to find anything. I originally thought that probably was one of the escapees. But the more I thought about it, why, if these people were drowning, let's say that they were in their raft and the raft began to fall apart, take water, and they had to abandon the raft and start swimming to shore, you wouldn't keep on that coat because it would weigh you down. You would shed that. I don't care how cold the water is. Yes, you would wear that coat in the raft, I believe, if the raft was not taking on water. But But let's start deducing something. If that body is in the water with the coat on, that would mean that the raft sank and they would have to swim. They wouldn't keep that coat on. So I don't buy that story anymore. I don't know what that person saw who called that in. There was other reports that people said they had saw bodies and they would send the Coast Guard out and it would be driftwood or a piece of plastic. In the FBI report, there was a handful of those mistaken identities. So I don't think what he saw was a body. Now, let's get back to the bodies and where they would have ended up. Okay, most people theorize, and the prison officials, that they didn't make it, and their body and potentially the raft got swept out to the ocean. Now, I subscribed to that theory for a long time, but the more that I read about Frank and John and Clarence Anglin, I started to have doubts. And the reason I was having doubts is because I thought, if, and that's a big if these guys made it to the shore, their whole life had been crime. That's all they knew. And all of a sudden, they're going to stop being criminals because they were never arrested again. You never heard anything from them. 50 years. What'd they do? Just get a job at McDonald's and turn their life around? So, because of looking at their background, I tended to believe that they drowned and they did not make it. Until I learned that in 2013 a letter arrived to the San Francisco Police Department, and I'll show it right here. And it was reportedly written by John Anglin, and the letter states, in essence, we made it. And he goes on to say that he had cancer and that his brother had died and Frank had died previously, but they made it off that island, but barely. I studied this letter, and I also compared this letter to the postcard. Remember that I said the warden had gotten on June 18th, 1962, saying, "Ha ha, we made it." And I'm going to try to put up those pictures side by side. But one of the intriguing things to me is if you look at the T in a known letter that John Anglin wrote, and the T in the postcard that they got on June 18th, they look similar, very similar to me. And I'm not an expert in handwriting by no means. But to me, there's validity there. This letter from 2013, although, you know, as you age, I would surmise that your writing changes a little bit, because he's 80-something years old, as it says in the letter. He's a little bit more shaky. But the construction of how that letter is written, with the exclamation points in certain areas, and how he lists his brother, he says, instead of John, or I'm sorry, instead of saying Clarence. I think that letter is legitimate, and I think that was written by John Anglin. And that gets me to the next point, I guess. If that letter was written by John Anglin, what do I think took place? Obviously, my mind has changed. And I think these three guys made it off of Alcatraz. And they survived, just as John said, barely. Now, that's big for me. because I am not a conspiracy theorist, and this is not a conspiracy, I guess, but I tend to believe that things are usually as they seem. But in this case, my mind completely flipped, and through my investigation, I think these three guys made it. You have no bodies found, and there was bodies that had found in that area before, that people had committed suicide and jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and stuff, and their bodies were found. They weren't floated out to sea. So there's three of them. At least one of the bodies showing up should occur. Okay? They started searching those waters immediately after they escaped, and they found no bodies. The life jackets. Why did the life jackets and the paddle? Well, you're not going to take a paddle with you. You know, if you make it, you discard it. You don't even discard it, you just leave it there. The raft, if they found that raft on Angel Island, and that is a big if because I have no concrete proof. I've seen one document. So if somebody that's watching this could actually pinpoint and say where that document came from, because I couldn't find it in the FBI report, but I know I read it somewhere, and not in a news report or on a website. It was an actual report at some point in time, but I just can't find it. If that is true, and that raft was found, that is further evidence that they made it to where they said they were. Now, if that is false, that still does not debunk the theory that they made it. According to Alan West, they were going to put holes in it and sink it once they made it. So maybe that's why the raft was never found. Or maybe when they got out of the raft, once they made it, they just let it go, and it floated out to the ocean as the tides were going that way. So the life jackets. The life jackets would have been discarded. Now, would they have cut them up? I don't believe in all that, you know, cut up stuff and drowned it. If they made it, which I believe they did, by the time they got there, they would have been exhausted, probably wet. If that raft took on water, maybe that raft didn't take on water, and they just made it, and they got rid of their life jackets. But the FBI tests that showed that they held air, and that is key, because if the bodies, if they would have drowned, wouldn't they have kept those life vests on if they were working, which they were? So why would you discard them other than because you made it? You see what I'm saying? That is what makes sense. You make it from Alcatraz to Angel Island or wherever they ended up on the shore. You don't take that with you. You throw it back in the water. So those are the reasons that I think that they made it. And then the Warden getting this postcard and seeing the similarities in that writing compared to John Anglin's writing then. You see what I'm saying? It was, the writing samples aren't decades apart. You got prison letters from John Anglin from 1962, and you have this postcard from 1962. And to the untrained eye, but you can look too, at least the T's, which are distinct, you know, with the high cross up top of the T is the same. So, you know, again, I am not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, by no means. But looking at this, the evidence, I think, supports that those three gentlemen made it off the island. And the only thing that dissuades me, the only thing that makes me think that they did not make it, is their proclivity to crime and them all of a sudden changing their life around. But put yourself in their shoes. You are the most wanted men of the time. 1962, you make this escape. Everybody's looking for you. Wouldn't you try at least to stay off the radar so you never went back there again? Because, you know, you're never getting out of prison after this escape if they find you. So wouldn't that be the time to turn your life around? I would think so. And maybe that's exactly what happened. And I think it is more likely than not that is what happened. That they lived out their lives however they did, criminal free, or at least they didn't get caught. But again, that would go against their previous background, because they got caught a lot according to their rap sheet. But they make this escape and decide, you know what? We're not going back. And the only way not to go back is to live a clean, free, non-criminal life. And of all these reports that I read, they always ended by saying they were extremely dangerous. Well, what I find odd is that John and Clarence Anglin, when they robbed the bank, they used toy guns. I didn't know that till I researched this further. And it doesn't seem like extremely dangerous folks to me. But they were bank robbers. So, again, I think that they made it off of the island, and it's remarkable. I think it's absolutely remarkable. And this is one case that I would love to dig into further. You know, what I didn't have a chance to do was, in that 2013 letter that John Anglin allegedly wrote and sent to the San Francisco Police Department, he gave some great clues. And those clues said that where he was living currently, which was in California, where he had lived for about 10 years, which was, I believe, in North or South Dakota. He had stated where Frank Morris was buried, I think was in Virginia. I would love to follow up on that more. So if there's anybody out there watching that, you know, has information on this, please reach out to me, and maybe we can get together and do some more investigating on this, because this case is fascinating, especially since my mind is totally flipped and I think that they made it. And I think that it was difficult, but I think the evidence shows that they made it, and not vice versa. You know, all these years that I've known about the case, I always thought that the evidence showed that they drowned in the bay. Mostly, I think, because, again, no more crime by these three. You know, they never pop up again. But also because of those addresses and photographs that were left behind. So let me address that. Why would they leave those behind? Now, some people say, well, they probably left it behind to throw off investigators, to make it look like they did drown. That's possible. Yes. But I tend to believe that it was more that they were in a panic, and maybe the raft began to take water, and maybe they had to swim, and it would have just lost, you know, just popped out of the boat or whatever it was. Because think about this. Wouldn't they want to have that on their body? So if they died and were floating out to sea and it was in their pocket, wouldn't it have maintained to stayed in their pocket of their jacket or tucked in their pants? If it was that important to them, wouldn't they have it on their person? And if they died, wouldn't it stayed on their person? Okay, because their clothing that they wore, it never showed up, you know. So if they had jackets on and they discarded them, they never showed up. So is it possible that they discarded those addresses and photographs to throw off It is very possible. Very possible. But the fact remains, they were there in the bay. The photographs, the addresses, they were in the bay for some reason. And I don't believe that it was because they didn't make it, although that has been popular theory by many people. There was other prisoners that escaped from Alcatraz that were caught. There was an individual who swam all the way over, and he made it. So, and he was in bad shape when he got there, but he made it. So it's possible that an untrained, not an expert swimmer could do it. But remember, they weren't just swimming. They had a raft. They had life jackets. Now, we don't know whether the raft was in perfect working condition. But if those life jackets are any indication of what that raft was, you can bet your bottom dollar that that raft was in good working condition. And I believe that it was. I didn't believe that originally when I first started looking at this case. I thought that raft fell apart. They panicked, started to swim, and didn't make it. They all three drowned. But the more I looked into it, I don't believe that. Those FBI lab reports showing that those life jackets, how they were constructed and how they still held water or held air to keep you up out of the water and floating, that raft, I am betting, did not fail them. And they made it. And that is my bottom line. This is the first, I believe, the very first case, quote unquote famous case, that I looked at that I am going against the government's theory and the prevailing theory that they didn't make it. So what happened? I think that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers broke out of Alcatraz prison June 12th, 1962, and they made it, and they lived a life, and I think they lived a life until they were old men, just like the 2013 news letter that came out that was sent to San Francisco Police Department. I believe that that letter is true, and I believe they did make it. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but I actually believe that they made it. I say 100 times, I can't believe that they made it. I really believe that. So, hey, that's my opinion. So, you heard it here. Ken Main's Unsolved No More, Alcatraz Prison Escape, Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin. They made it.